Hello everyone and welcome back to another session of Elden Ring PvP and another weapon showcase. Today we're taking a look at Eleonora's Poleblade. It is a weapon that you get by killing Eleonora. She's at the Second Church of America, and when you fight her, it's actually not necessary to have taken part in Yura's quest to get her to be there, so you can just waltz on over to the church and get the weapon. Easy enough. Getting started with this weapon, it requires 12 strength, 21 dexterity, and 19 arcane in order to wield, and it weighs 6 units. The skill of the weapon is Poleblade Dance, and as you can see, it does quite good work, to say the very least. At plus 10, it has a physical base damage of 176, a fire base damage of 176, an E scaling in strength, C in dexterity, and D in arcane. It does have a bleed damage of 55 per hit, but because of that arcane scaling, if you have anything above the base arcane to use the weapon, you can expect a much higher bleed buildup per hit than 55. So, overall, phenomenal weapon. This thing is super fun to use. There's a lot of good going for it. It's no secret that I'm a huge fan of the twin blade weapons in this game, and this, I would say, is probably without a doubt the most powerful of them, and for good reason. The bleed definitely helps out with that, but Bloodblade Dance is really what sells this weapon. The thing with Bloodblade Dance, it is of course the biggest pro of the weapon, and it's great because it has a lot of attacks that deal good damage in quick succession, and that builds up bleed very quickly. The nice thing with that as well is that the second part of the attack has really great hyper armor, and it does a little retreat after you've done it, so it is good at jumping in and getting out of enemy range. So both of those things combined are great, and then on top of that you can stack on the Rotten Winged Insignia and stack up that damage from attacking in quick succession, and overall it just does good things. The hyper armor on it is really nice though, I can't understate that. It is phenomenal, and you can trade hits with it and then back off and then just run right back in on your opponent to keep the pressure on them. It works really well, and people don't expect it, so they just get into range and try to attack you, and because it's got such good hyper armor, you can even trade hits with something like a greatsword or an ultra greatsword, as you saw in the last fight. So, needless to say, it's really freaking good. Now, other pros of the weapon, of course. First and foremost, the moveset is pretty darn good. The running attacks when two-handed are a bit meh, but the running attacks when one-handed, those are the ones you want to use. The running one-handed R1 is phenomenal at chasing people down because it is, of course, a thrust, and we all know at this point, thrusting attacks do good work when it comes to chasing an opponent down. Aside from that, the R2 attacks on this weapon, they're not overly useful, but they are just fun to use, because, let's be honest, it's always fun when your character turns into a Beyblade. You just charge up the attack and you spin, dealing a large number of hits, and it's hard to hit with, but when you do, it is extremely satisfying. The damage on that attack builds up extremely quickly. It could use a bit more hyper armor in my opinion, but it works out well, and the second R2 also is really good because, again, people don't expect you to follow up with it, so they'll just run headfirst into it. That's been my experience with it. I've landed it a handful of times at this point, and every single time I've landed, the second part of the R2 has been just from someone running headfirst into it. So, it works. For whatever reason, people just never see it coming. So, that's a nice thing. Other than that, though, the bleed damage, of course, is always nice to have. You can never go wrong with having bleed damage, and that's really about it as far as pros are concerned. The moveset is good. It does have some downsides to it, though, and that's where I would say the biggest con lies as well. It has a lot of good going for it, but because it is a twin blade, and this is where part of the balance of twin blades comes in, a lot of the attacks with twin blades are a multi-hit attack. And because they're a multi-hit attack, the majority of the damage is on the second swing of the attack. The first swing of the attack it's a little disappointing. The nice thing with this weapon that helps mitigate that issue is the bleed buildup, because that builds up on the first and second swing. So really, it's not that big of a deal for this one in particular, but it is still a con. And that's one of the reasons why the one-handed moveset is better for chasing down a more passive opponent. For the more aggressive opponents, stand your ground, two-hand it, and go to town, just wail on them with this thing. It works very well. But you need to be able to recognize when you need to switch from one-handing to two-handing. And that's really the big thing with this weapon that really makes it sort of click. Once you get that idea in your head and can really focus on doing it, you'll do a lot better with the weapon. And for twin blades in general, to be honest, that holds true. Aside from that, though, the other big con of the weapon is that it is split damage with fire. And of course, when it rains, you will deal less damage. Now, fortunately in this fight, my opponent was also using a weapon that was split with fire, so it was even in that regard. But because it isn't always that case, you'll have to, play a little more carefully when it's raining and your opponent is using a lightning weapon, for example, because then they'll have an even bigger advantage over you. But at the end of the day, it's really not that big of a deal. This weapon does enough on its own where, yes, even though it's split with fire, it's not that big of a detriment to the weapon. Just because it's got so many other good things going for it with the bleed, with the moveset, with the overall damage that it can deal, it's okay. So, it is what it is. That said, the next video that will be up will be the Bloody Helix. Another super fun weapon, good arcane weapon, good bleed weapon. That's the one that's going to be next for you guys. After that, though, the next weapons that we're going to be taking a look at will be the Magma Blade, which an opponent I fought earlier in this video was using, as well as the Giant's Red Braid. Super fun whip. I had a great time using it. Hope you guys are looking forward to seeing it. After those, we'll be taking a look at the Golden Halberd and the McKellen Knight's Sword, and then the Serpent Blade and the Sword Spear. That is the current order of things. So, I hope you guys are looking forward to those. Thank you all for stopping by. If you liked this video, then give it a like, subscribe, do all the YouTube things. Let me know what weapons you guys want to see after that list runs out, and that's all I've got. So, thank you again, and I'll see you next time.